So loneliness is prevalent among certain groups. It certainly can be experienced by anyone, but there seems to be higher rates of loneliness among particular groups, among young people, especially homosexual teens, among single, divorced, and widowed adults, among the elderly, and among individuals whose parents have divorced. And we can think about how these different groups and their experiences of loneliness relate back to the different types of loneliness that we just went over. So what are some of the roots of loneliness? Well, some of the roots include early experiences, and some of them are social trends. So early experiences may be some of the inappropriate behaviors that a child might engage in. It might be aloofness or aggressiveness, or maybe they're very competitive, which might lead to some isolation, or maybe they're very dependent. And this might affect their relationships with peers. That's just one example of early experiences. There also can be other causes. Sometimes, of course, we can think about children who don't feel like they fit in with other individuals in their school for a variety of reasons. We can also think about bullying and how that can contribute to feelings of loneliness. So these are just a couple of categories that are pointed out in your textbook, but there are certainly many. Also social trends. So being very busy, maybe using a lot of technology where we have less interaction with others. And certainly we're finding with coronavirus that people are feeling even more lonely than ever, especially those people who live alone. If you live with family, then you're perhaps not as likely to feel as lonely in terms of perhaps relationships with your family, but you may feel a social loneliness because you don't have that same network of friends, or that the opportunities to spend time with your friends like you used to. So there are many different things that are correlated with loneliness, but I do want to point out one. One is shyness, and shyness is associated with feelings of discomfort, inhibition, or having a lot of caution in interpersonal relations. Now, I want you to think about those attachment relationships that we went over just a little while ago, and how if you grew up with an attachment figure who was cold and rejecting, you may not feel comfortable forming friendships. And that doesn't mean you don't want friendships, but you just don't feel safe. And so that could then lead to some feelings of loneliness. It might lead to shyness. And it's not because, I think we misunderstand sometimes shyness by a thought that someone feels uncomfortable in a social situation, perhaps because someone might think that they don't have social skills or they don't have confidence, but in fact, there can be lots of different reasons that a person could be shy. We could also think about some people are very easily affected by sensory stimulation, and these are people who we might call highly sensitive people. And so, if you're that type of person, you might be the person who, when things are loud, it feels really stressful or uncomfortable. When there's too many things going on around you, it feels uncomfortable. When you're around a lot of people, it feels uncomfortable. Or when there are unpredictable changes, that feels uncomfortable. And so you might just be very sensitive to your environment. And so you associate then being around others with negative feelings, because that brings upon a feeling of overstimulation. And so but just because you feel that discomfort, that doesn't mean that you don't want to have social relationships. So you can still feel that loneliness, even though those relationships might feel uncomfortable. So it's a matter of finding ways to have social relationships and also not feel overwhelmed by the environment. For those of you who can identify with that, there's a great book called The Highly Sensitive Person that I would encourage you to take a look at. So shyness is one potential reason, but there are many other things correlated with loneliness. And people who who are lonely, they are more likely to show lower responsiveness to their conversational partners. They're less likely to disclose much about themselves. Now, this does not mean that they don't have good social skills. I think your book says poor social skills. I took out the phrase poor when I was thinking about social skills, because you could have very good social skills, but you may not be able to demonstrate those skills in certain situations because you fear the outcomes. Perhaps going back, I'll just use this simply, to those early attachment relationships. And there are many other reasons for why you might not do that. It may be that you fear sharing because you've been hurt before, perhaps in early childhood or perhaps more recently. Also, a self-defeating attributional style. Thinking negatively about social situations can make people behave in ways that confirm their negative expectations. We would call this reciprocal determinism, where our thoughts affect our behaviors, and then our behaviors affect our environment, and then our environment affects our thoughts. So we maybe think that we don't have that we might think that social situations aren't going to go well for us, and so we don't act very in a way that is likely to engage others in social situations, and so it doesn't lead to engagement with others, and then that results in a reconfirmation of our thoughts that social situations aren't going to go very well for us. So you see this dynamic that results, and it's called reciprocal. It's based on something called reciprocal determinism. And you can see here that there are some ways of thinking that you might see among people who are lonely, some clusters of cognitions. And this is, you can see here, there are some people who have an avoidance of friendship, some people who have low self-disclosure, avoidance of sexual relationships, a lack of assertiveness in relationships, avoidance of potentially intimate relationships, or avoidance of other people. And so the cognitions vary depending upon those individual behaviors. So what are some strategies for conquering loneliness? We know that chronic loneliness is associated with many different mental and physical health problems. You learned about physical health problems and more specifically health psychology in earlier chapters, and the relationship between positive health outcomes and social relationships. So you know how important social relationships are in our physical health. And you also know how important relationships are in mental health. We'll be exploring that more in later chapters, but I'm sure you know from other classes that you've taken and from your own personal experiences. Loneliness can be overcome in a variety of ways. I want to first point out by saying that if you're feeling very lonely and it's having a significant effect on your life, I would suggest that you consider seeking help from a counselor. I think that many students who have visited the counseling center at Northeast State have shared with me that they have found it to be very helpful, very beneficial, and it's free, by the way, and completely anonymous. So that's one option. I will tell you too that another option for you all is ETSU offers or has a community counseling clinic that's at their counseling. It's in their counseling department at in Wharf Pickle at ETSU. They offer free counseling to anyone in the community. You do not have to be an ETSU student. It's open to anyone. If you want to find out more about that, I would encourage you to go to etsu.edu. You can do a Google search for Community Counseling Clinic, and you'll find out their contact information and how to set up an appointment. Those are very helpful resources whether you have health insurance or not, but especially if you don't have health insurance, or if you have health insurance and you don't have mental health coverage. If you have health insurance, of course, then talking with your health insurance carrier to find out who your preferred providers in the area are can be very helpful. And if you're insured under a parent, oftentimes through your parents' insurance, you have some free sessions that are available. Now, this isn't with every employer, but many employers offer a certain number of free counseling sessions. I think a common number is 6. And so you can go for 6 sessions without having to pay a copay. Some insurance companies don't offer this, some employers don't, but like I said, some do. It's certainly worth looking into. I also want to point out that sometimes it can be some simple changes that we might try to make in our lives. We might, for example, you might find yourself wanting to withdraw from social situations. And so it may be that just avoiding withdrawing or avoiding the temptation to withdraw from social situations can be very helpful in reducing feelings of loneliness. You might also find that using the internet can be helpful. I think now with COVID, and then also even outside of COVID, a lot of people are finding that using Zoom can be very helpful. People that you may have family members or friends you haven't been able to see for some time, and just setting up a Zoom meeting can be helpful, or there are multiple other platforms that you could use. And of course, you have FaceTime, WhatsApp, and lots of other ones on your phone. And then, so reaching out to people can be so helpful in helping you to overcome loneliness and breaking the habit of that self-defeating attributional style, which really requires you to challenge those thoughts you have about your own abilities, so that you then engage in different behaviors, which is then going to change the environment, which will then help you to change your thinking. And that relates back to that reciprocal determinism. And then working on developing social skills. I think all of us can work on improving social skills. What I would encourage you to do is if you are feeling lonely and it's not a significant problem in your life, but it's something you'd like to work on, and it's something that of course, if you're feeling very lonely and it's significantly affecting your life, I think seeing a counselor is going to be a very important step. But if it's something that's somewhat affecting your life, working on social skills can be very helpful. I would encourage you to go to the first chapter in your textbook, and there's a series of important suggestions for you to help you to identify effective self-help books. So many self-help books, they make these real big promises, and they don't provide you with real research-based evidence for what they're suggesting. And so you want to find those self-help books that meet those qualities that are suggested in chapter 1, and I would encourage you to look at those. So I'm going to stop here. We've spent quite a bit of time in this chapter, but I think that this chapter has so many concepts and theories that are of particular relevance to each of us as we think about our lives and our relationships. And I would also say too that as you're reading, and after you've listened to this, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Or if you just want to talk about anything in this presentation or anything you've read, I would love to talk with each of you. So please let me know. You have my phone number. We can talk over the phone. We can set up an individual Zoom meeting. So you just need to let me know. Thank you so much. Let's just take a brief moment for you to test yourself on a few of the things that you've learned in this video and in your readings about loneliness. So an attributional style that explains one's loneliness as blank is most likely to contribute to the experience of chronic loneliness. So which of these is it? Is it unstable and due to internal causes? Is it unstable and due to external causes? Is it stable and due to external causes, or stable and due to internal causes? If you're not sure, again, go back and look at your notes, go back and look at your textbook. If you think you know the answer, we're going to move on. And the correct answer is stable and due to internal causes. Let's try another one. Alex and his partner are preparing to relocate to Europe for a once-in-a-lifetime job opportunity next month. While they're excited for the prospects of career advancement, they're having difficulties because they'll be leaving their closest friends behind. What type of loneliness are they currently experiencing? Is it transient loneliness, transitional loneliness, social loneliness, or emotional loneliness? If you selected transitional loneliness, you're right. First, I'd like to point out that transitions are part of the human experience, and new settings and even the anticipation of new settings and situations often give rise to loneliness. It's important that when we have these feelings of transitional loneliness, that we need to recognize them. It's normal to feel disconnected. It's normal to feel lonely. And so instead of downplaying these very real feelings, we need to really think of these feelings as an impetus for self-reflection and for acts of connection. So people can emerge from transitions as, with a deep sense of fulfillment. And this can then serve as a springboard for new relationships. And of course, this doesn't mean that old relationships will end, but they may change. And as you've learned about relationship maintenance strategies, it may be that those relationships will just require some adjustments. Let's do one more, and this is based on your readings as well. And so Peterson and his colleagues note that a key problem in chronic loneliness appears to be what? Early negative social behavior that leads to rejection, early experiences of being ignored by an authority figure, early social support that disappears during adolescence, or early exposure to the internet during childhood. If you selected early negative social behavior that leads to rejection, you're right. That's what Peterson and his colleagues found in their studies on chronic loneliness. I'd also like to point out, too, that there are some additional factors that can contribute to chronic loneliness. And I think a very significant one can be rejection sensitivity. So of course, none of us like being rejected, but some of us are more sensitive to social rejection than others. And people who are high in rejection sensitivity can be so fearful and aversive to rejection that it impacts their lives on a daily basis. And so individuals who are high in rejection sensitivity then are very sensitive to any signal coming from another person that may possibly indicate rejection. So they're constantly looking for signs that they're about to be rejected. And this may result in them responding in ways that can be dramatic in terms of, having any hint that someone doesn't want to be with them. So basically, when people have these fears and these expectations, they often misinterpret, they may distort, and they may overreact to what other people say and do. And sometimes they may do so with being hurt or with anger. So they may be sensitive to facial expressions. So they might notice very subtle changes in facial expressions that they think may indicate rejection. They also tend to have a heightened level of physiological activity so that they're more on alert for cues about being rejected, and they may be more inclined to distorting and misinterpreting the actions of others, and they may pay more attention to signs of potential rejection than signs that do not indicate rejection. And then they're also preoccupied with lots of different types of rejection. At the same rate, they want relationships, but that fear of rejection can lead them to feel very lonely. So as I share this with you, I want you to think about how some of this rejection sensitivity could come from those early experiences in childhood, where someone may not have had the social skills that would have allowed them to navigate very well in social relationships, and they may have experienced some rejection. And because during childhood, children are very affected by feelings of rejection, and kids can be pretty hurtful in schools and in any setting where there's a group of children. And so those experiences can have a very long lasting effect on kids. So helping children to develop those social behaviors so that they can have the skills that they need to get along well with others and to develop friendships, to navigate play, for example, that's going to be very important for kids. Well, what have you learned about loneliness? Well, you've learned about loneliness and its prevalence, that it is a normal part of the human condition, but that there are things that we can do for conquering loneliness. You also learned about how early experiences can contribute to loneliness and how current social trends contribute to loneliness. You also learned about shyness and social skills and self-defeating attributions and how these can contribute, especially poor social skills, to loneliness. And then, as I mentioned, you learned about some of the suggestions for conquering loneliness. As always, if you have any questions after you've done your reading or after watching this video, please do not hesitate to let me know. I look forward to seeing each of you online.